We live in an era where Silicon Valley insists that every human problem can be solved with a microchip, a blockchain, or an app. And when it comes to the global water crisis, the West has a long, slightly embarrassing history of dropping multi-million-pound, highly complex gadgets into rural Africa, only to watch them break down 6 months later. Across the continent, there is a literal graveyard of well-intentioned, entirely useless Western technology. But among the rusted failures, there is an exception. A piece of engineering so brutally simple, so profoundly unglamorous, that you've probably never heard of it. It doesn't have a microchip. It doesn't have an app. Yet, this analog technology, designed by a quiet British engineer, has provided clean water to millions. More importantly, his accompanying invention, a wildly simple toilet design, provided something arguably just as vital. Today, we're looking at the story of Dr. Peter Morgan, a man who proved that sometimes the greatest British engineering export isn't a suspension bridge or a jet engine. It's a wooden lever, a pipe, and the profound realization that true innovation means knowing when to keep things simple. To understand the magnitude of what this one engineer achieved, we need to look at the landscape of rural development in the 1970s. The British Empire was dismantling, and in its wake lay a complex web of newly independent nations struggling with foundational infrastructure. In rural southern Africa, the primary burden of water collection fell, as it almost always does, on women and children. We are talking about hours of walking every single day. But the lack of water was only half the crisis. The other half was sanitation, or rather, the complete lack of it. Open defecation was widespread simply because traditional pit latrines were dark, foul-smelling, and swarming with flies, which in turn spread cholera and dysentery. The international response back in London, Washington, and Geneva was highly typical of the era. The mindset was, we are Western engineers. We have conquered the atom. We can certainly build a water pump. And so, they designed pumps. Beautiful, complex, imported pumps. But there was a fatal flaw in this top-down arrogance. The designers in Europe failed to account for the harsh realities of the environment. When a rubber seal broke in a village 200 miles from the nearest hardware store, the pump died. When a delicate steel handle snapped under the heavy, daily usage of 500 people, the pump died. It was a classic case of what happens when engineering is divorced from the end user. It's a bit like designing a Formula One car for a farmer who just needs a reliable tractor. Enter Peter Morgan. Born in Britain, educated in marine biology of all things, Morgan moved to what was then Rhodesia in the 1970s. He didn't arrive with a savior complex or a mandate to install shiny British tech. He worked for the Ministry of Health, and his approach was radically different. He looked at the graveyard of foreign pumps and realized something crucial. The problem wasn't that the villagers didn't know how to use the technology. The problem was that the technology was arrogant. Morgan's decision was counterintuitive to the entire engineering establishment. He decided to de-engineer the water pump. If a part could break, he wanted it gone. If a part couldn't be fixed by a local blacksmith using scrap metal, it was useless. Working with local communities, he helped refine what became known as the B-type bush pump. It is, to put it mildly, an ugly piece of machinery. But its ugliness is its superpower. Look at the lever. It pivots not on a fragile factory-made ball bearing, but on a block of hardwood, often teak or muqua, sourced directly from local forests. Wood is self-lubricating, incredibly durable. And if it eventually wears out, a villager can literally carve a replacement from a tree. The prevailing wisdom at the time said this was a step backwards. Why use wood when you can use steel? But Morgan understood that a pump that works 365 days a year is infinitely superior to a pump that works beautifully for a month and then sits rotting for a decade. By the early 1980s, the newly independent government of Zimbabwe made the B-type bush pump their national standard. But Morgan knew that water was only half the battle. Clean water is entirely pointless if the surrounding environment is a breeding ground for disease. This is where Morgan's background in biology kicked in, and where he took his biggest reputational risk. It is one thing to be a respected engineer designing water systems. It is entirely another to dedicate your career to human excrement. Try going to a cocktail party in London in 1980 and explaining that your life's work is refining the pit toilet. But Morgan noticed something. People hated using traditional latrines because they smelled terrible and were full of flies. So, they went in the bushes, polluting the very water table the pumps were trying to tap. Morgan invented the Blair VIP latrine. It is a masterclass in passive engineering. He added a simple ventilation pipe painted black. Why black? Because the African sun heats the pipe. As the air inside the pipe heats up, it rises. This creates a continuous updraft, sucking the foul odors out of the pit and venting them into the sky. Fresh air is pulled down through the toilet hole. The smell? Gone. But here is the stroke of absolute genius. Flies are naturally attracted to the smell emanating from the top of the pipe. They fly down the pipe, into the pit, but when they try to leave, they fly towards the brightest light source. Morgan put a simple wire mesh screen over the top of the pipe and left the toilet itself semi-dark. The flies fly up the bright pipe, hit the screen, and eventually die and fall back in. It is a toilet that acts as a giant, passive fly trap. No electricity, no moving parts, just physics and biology working in perfect harmony. The outcome was nothing short of a quiet revolution. Let's look at the numbers. According to historical records, the Blair VIP latrine was adopted on a massive scale. Hundreds of thousands were built across Zimbabwe, and the design was soon adopted by the World Bank and the UN as the global gold standard for rural sanitation. But numbers don't tell the story of dignity. When NGO workers conducted field interviews in the late 20th century regarding sanitation, a recurring theme emerged. It wasn't just about health, it was about pride. One composite account from a rural health worker notes, women had to wait until nightfall to relieve themselves in the fields, risking snake bites and assault. The VIP latrine gave us a room of our own. It was clean, it didn't smell. It gave us our dignity back. Morgan didn't patent the Bush pump. He didn't patent the Blair latrine. Unlike modern tech billionaires who ruthlessly protect their intellectual property to extract wealth, Morgan placed his designs in the public domain. He operated on a fundamentally different philosophy. If an idea works, it belongs to humanity. In 2013, the world finally noticed. Dr. Peter Morgan was awarded the Stockholm Water Prize, effectively the Nobel Prize for water. He accepted it, not with a grand speech about saving the world, but with the quiet, slightly awkward humility of a man who would rather be back in a workshop testing soil permeability. Morgan's legacy is a stark warning to modern philanthropy. In the mid-2000s, a new gadget swept the charity world: the play pump. The idea was that children playing on a roundabout would pump water. It attracted tens of millions of dollars from Western donors, celebrities, and governments. It was highly photogenic. It was also a disaster. When the kids got tired, adult women were forced to manually push a heavy iron roundabout just to get a bucket of water. It was exhausting, inefficient, and deeply humiliating. The play pump was designed for Western donors to feel good. The bush pump was designed for African villagers to survive. Britain's historical relationship with Africa is, to put it mildly, fraught with exploitation and imposed authority. We rarely reflect on that history without heavy caveats. But in the quiet corners of this shared history, there are figures like Peter Morgan. He didn't build an empire. He didn't extract resources. He listened. He stripped away the hubris of Western engineering and looked at what was actually needed. The true hallmark of genius isn't complexity. It's building something so seamlessly integrated into daily life that people forget who invented it, but rely on it to live. Dr. Peter Morgan might not have a statue in Trafalgar Square, but his monument stands in millions of rural backyards.